I'm joined now by communications manager and play-by-play voice of your Toronto Argonauts, Mike Hogan. Thanks so much for joining me, Hoagie.
It's about time you asked me to come on your show.
It's true. I don't know why I haven't had you on. Actually, it's hard for me to explain. We've been on the air for I guess almost a couple of years now, and you are the voice of the Argos. You know more about the Argos than just about anyone else. I don't know why I haven't had you on to this point. So we fixed this. You're on, and if you're not careful, we may make this a habit.
I'm happy with that, and I'm very thankful for some of the exceptionally kind things you said about the articles we put up. So thank you for that.
Well, you've earned each and every one. So thank you for providing us with that content and with that insight into the organization, because it's like nothing else. So we're now a year into some form of lockdown. How you holding up? Do you have any secrets for the rest of us as we hit what is hopefully the quarter pole going down the stretch here?
I think I'm like everybody else. I mean, it's been wave after wave after wave, and last year I kind of got myself mentally prepared by saying immediately, okay, we're not going to play this year. And if we start playing at Labor Day, woohoo, there's a carrot. And it just, obviously it never came to fruition. So I was prepared for last year, even though it wasn't easy. If you allow me to get personal, I've been pretty strong mentally in terms of mental health. And at one point last year, in around September, after everything had been canceled, I reached out. We have a service within MLSE that allowed me to speak to somebody, and it really helped. But it was tough last year, and this year, again, it's come in waves. And I think after free agency started, and the Argos had the haul that we did in terms of free agency, it was like, okay, let's go. Now we're all excited again. And then after the draft, okay, now let's go. And even after the global draft, we're ready to go. And anybody who says that the Argonauts are not wanting to play in 2021, is just missing the boat, because we really want to get on the field.
Yeah, well, it's always, it's from the same people that are always there to criticize the Argos. So on one side, it's you're spending way too much money. You're clearly way over the cap. Oh, and also you don't want to play. So you can't have it both ways.
If we didn't want to play, if we weren't taking this seriously, I would have been out of work for a year. They would have laid me out. They would have laid so many people off in the front office. We had two people in ticketing. I think that was the only two layoffs that we had, and there were temporary things, but I think that was it. Like, all of the people in football ops, everybody's kept their job, and everybody's worked exceptionally hard throughout all of this.
Yeah, no, that's really well said. And thank you also for speaking up about your personal situation. I mean, talking about mental health isn't easy, and it's a really important thing. And coming from someone like you, I think that's great to hear that you not only had the courage to reach out and talk, but then to tell us about that is a really big thing. And I can tell you right now, no matter what we talk about for the next however many minutes, that's going to be the most important takeaway, because I think it will help people understand that, this isn't easy for anybody. And if you're struggling, if you're having any trouble, there are people you can talk to, and you should. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And I think we're doing a good job of sort of wiping that stigma away, because, like you said, it's there. And it helps. It makes a big difference. So thank you for speaking very openly about that.
Well, 10 years ago, I think there would have been a stigma attached. And I think society has gone a long way in going and getting the message out that, you know what, it's normal. Nobody, if you got through the pandemic without having any mental problems at all, or questions, or depression, or oh man, you've got to be one of the few. And I think of myself as being pretty strong, but I'm not perfect. And if me speaking up a little bit helps somebody, then it was worth it. But I didn't have any problem at all doing it or talking about it now.
Part of me wonders if my very brief time in radio helped prepare me for this. It's one of those things where I actually left radio because I felt I got lonely, and no one ever understood that. But to me, it was such an isolating thing, especially, I was doing overnights and evenings, and it was just me in a box. If I ever did see anybody, it was a newsie behind a piece of glass, which was sort of like our 2021 screen. And yeah, it was really isolating, and hour upon hour. Like you spent years doing a show on your own for several years. That's maybe conditioned you a little bit to be able to withstand some of the isolation that we feel now. I don't know.
I guess, but usually there was somebody around. There was in talk radio. There was always a producer and a board op and a news type and a sports type and a co-host or somebody who came in to sit in the chair opposite me. So it wasn't like doing an overnight shift or evening news or something where because I think anybody in radio has gone through that. When I was doing morning news in Ottawa, I'd be in there for a couple of hours first thing in the morning by myself before other people started to trickle in. And it's, I like people. The thing I miss most, aside from the games, is just going to the office. It was very odd when we went to Chris Schultz's funeral. There were a limited number of people, and Mike Clemens was there. We were both asked to give a eulogy, and I sat next to Mike. There were three of us in a pew, so we were physically distanced. And I said, "Do you realize it's been almost a year to the day since we last saw each other?" And I talked to Mike 5 times a week, 6 times a week. We're on Zoom meetings on a regular basis, and it's not like we haven't kept in touch, but we had not physically seen each other in a year. And, Vince Magri, I haven't seen Vince since last March. We talk all the time on the phone. Chris Belenovich, I've seen a few times because we were working in the NHL bubble last year, and we actually went golfing once last year, same as Adam Kruger. I've seen Adam Kruger once since last April, and we talk all the time. So it's really strange, but this sense of normalcy when we get back to work and back to playing, I think is just going to make things even more exciting for CFL fans when we're able to get back to our favorite park.
The stimulation is going to be incredible. I've got so many plans ready to go, so I can't wait. And I think everyone is just, we see some of the events that are now going on in the States, and we're just like, oh, we're so close. Yeah. So I want to talk to you about the CFL draft, not just the players that the Argos selected, but the process of covering the draft, because it's such a unique one that you are able to offer fans. And I think Argos fans maybe by now take it for granted a little bit, the access, the behind the scenes access that you have concerning the draft process. This is something that just simply isn't done with other sports organizations, and I understand why. So how were you able to convince the current and previous brass to allow you to cover the draft the way that you do?
This started when Barker and Milanovic was there. I forget what year it was. It was the Anthony Coombs draft. And you mentioned it in an article after the global draft. I was one of those guys that said, yeah, everybody always says that, we couldn't believe the guy was on the board that was there and that we got. So I went up to Barker and said, can I write this? Can I write what it's like to be in a draft room? And he thought about it, and he talked to Milanovic about it, and Scott was all in. He thought, this is a great idea because it will allow people to see that, yeah, we are telling the truth when we say that we get our guy. It was real. I found it really eye-opening. They were so all in on Coombs that year that the way they did it is they literally had a board with everybody listed, not just by position, but, everybody on one list. And they had actually taken Anthony Coombs and put him down in the 9 or 10 slot in case somebody in the office had gone in, saw the board and talked to somebody. And then at about 6:30 when the doors were closed, they put Coombs' name back up to the number 1 and switched it with whoever was in the top slot at the time. So that was eye-opening. And that's where Jim said, you can talk about anything you want, just don't talk about other players, for the obvious reason that, okay, let's say we don't get a guy at 3, we pick at 5, and we're really interested in acquiring that guy. We don't want the other team to know that we're that excited and that red hot after somebody else. And also there were some names thrown around in trade talk that first draft, and I thought it was unfair to the player under contract because he wasn't dealt to point out that his name was being discussed in a deal. So those are basically the only parameters I have. Don't talk about players that aren't selected by the Argos, and don't talk about anybody in trade discussions. And other than that, I'm basically allowed to write anything that I want and try to be as honest as possible. And, you're right. The Argos give access like no other team in North America. And, I never take this. This is my favorite, and the free agency stories are my favorite articles by far to write, because I have no idea what's happening. I can't plan the article ahead because nobody knows how a draft or a free agency period is going to pan out. The Bo Levi Mitchell experience, the non-signing and the waiting and waiting and waiting, was so interesting to be a part of when Pop made that offer to Bo Levi 2 years ago. It was incredible to be in that room and just, watching how the other people in the organization were so anxious to get on with other potential free agents, but couldn't. And then watching the draft this year, just some of the picks surprised everybody at where they went and who picked them in other instances and who didn't go ahead of pick 7. So it was a really interesting process, and I hope I was able to convey that.
For sure. It's one of my favorite things to look forward to every year, because I've been around football for decades, but I've never been in a draft room. And the closest I'd ever gotten previous to your doing these articles was probably the John Feinstein book, Next Man Up, where he covered the Baltimore Ravens. And they did allow him, by NFL standards, really quite incredible access to things. And I'm still not sure how much they edited out, but it was a really good read. And I love just sort of seeing those behind the scenes things, even though it was the Ravens, who I hate as a longtime Bengals fan. I could still, get in there and read it, although it crushed me a little bit because they talked about passing on Chris Perry, and of course the Bengals picked him up, and it was just devastating to go through that pain once again after having experienced it sort of firsthand and then reading it in a book again a few years later.
The thing that I think would surprise anybody is how similar it is to a fantasy draft. And if you were on a fantasy draft with 5 of your friends constituting one team, there would be the discussion, okay, do we take them here or do we wait until the next round because they may be gone? Well, my buddy's a big Capitals fan. He wants Ovechkin. If we don't take him now, we won't get him. And that's, the kind of thing that goes on in this room with everybody taking the role, not everybody, but all the coaches are assigned another team. So, in this case, and I don't know specifically what the teams were, I would be surprised if Glenn Young wasn't Winnipeg, because he knows the situation. Steve McAdoo or Mike Davis would have been Saskatchewan. Coach Dinwiddie would have been Calgary. Guys who have that recent history with a team, they know what teams might be looking for or thinking about. They know the personnel. They know exactly what's going on. And when they have a mock draft, they will have that coach represent that team. So they have a flow and an idea of what that team may do. So I'm not going to give. There are some other wrinkles they have in the mock draft that I find are fascinating, but out of respect, I'm not going to write or talk about those. But it's a remarkably similar experience to being in a draft room with your buddies for a fantasy league.
Well, you're giving me all sorts of ideas for my own fantasy football draft, so that's helpful at the very least. I'm going to have to do some more intel on the other guys drafting. It stresses me just you talking about it. I get stressed in draft auctions and things for fantasy football. The mood had, especially this year, was it stressful, tense, maybe this year more than in years past?
In some instances, yes. The whole thing was about Nicastro, who they love. Where do we take him? We hope that he goes to 7. We hope he goes to 7. But by the time 7 rolled around, Dockstader was still there, which is something they didn't, with all of the mock drafts, they didn't think that they were going to have an opportunity to pick between the two. And it wasn't heated, but it was very passionate reasoning on, okay, why should we take Nicastro now? Or do we think he can slide? And there's where the mock drafting comes in. Would Calgary be more interested in Nicastro because he's a local guy? They also have McEwen at center. Would they want Nicastro as a guard? Will they use him as a backup in case McEwen, God forbid, get injured? So there's all of that discussion, and it was pretty split. And then, Vince Magri, who you've talked to and I think have gotten to know over the years, Vince isn't a loud guy by nature, but Vince really stood up toward the end. And Ryan Jansen from the league said, I forget what the time count was, but he says, Argos, you have 30 seconds. And he stood up and he said, basically on the Zoom call, and said, guys, we wanted Nicastro. We want them both, but our whole draft was, kind of around getting Nicastro in this spot. If Dockstader is there at 11, that's great, but let's get our guy. And everybody kind of said, you know what, you're right. He's the guy that we had where we wanted him. He was there. Our whole draft was kind of, okay, let's get Nicastro because we needed that. We got enough guys who can play guard tackle. We don't have that guy who can play guard center. And now we do. And the fact that Doc Stater was there was, as I wrote in the piece, it was the easiest selection of the night because everybody said, yeah. Dinwiddie said, do we still go with Doc Stater? And he got Docs out. And, Coach McAdoo has this big voice, and the offensive line coach, and he went, yes. So that was the easy one. And I don't think in none of the mock drafts were the Argos able to get these two guys, and couldn't have been happier to get these two guys.
I like to imagine in my head that in the Calgary War Room, or the online version of the Calgary War Room, everyone was pounding their fists on the table in anger when it was announced that Peter Nicastro was taken. That's how I'm going to imagine things went down in Calgary, because I think that would be amazing. But I don't know. I don't think I would have gone that way. And that's where, I have so much respect for, Vince and Murphy and all the scouts and the coaches that do all this work, because, I know nothing. I don't have any experience as a scout. But in watching those two players on film, I really felt like Doc Stater was going to be gone in the first round. I felt like Nicastro would probably be there in the second. I think I had him as an early third in my grading, which, again, it means very little. And so I think I probably would have been too nervous at losing Doc Stater. But like you said, it was such a key to get somebody that could play guard and center. And I love Nicastro's center film. There wasn't a ton of it, but there was a game I watched. I think it was Calgary playing
was
Alberta.
It Regina or Saskatchewan? Was it that game?
I think it was the Alberta Calgary game. He was playing center, and he was just annihilating everybody. I thought it was by far his best run game performance. And watching that one game, I was like, he might be a better center than he is a guard, which surprised me because I thought he was a very good guard. The reason I had him a little lower down is because I don't tend to grade guards, I don't think, as high as I do tackles. But if you need a guy that can play guard and center, he might have been the only guy in the draft that answers the brief. So in that case, you've got to take him in that first round.
Despite the fact that I was an O-line coach for a year just after high school, I went back and helped out with the high school. I don't watch the offensive line with the same finite detail that you or Vince or Murph or certainly Mac or anybody like that do. But when I went back and watched a little bit of his video, and I threw this at Vince, and he went, you know what, that's not bad. He reminded me of Don Picard. Just the way he gets off the ball, and he's got that nastiness that Dom had. And, physically, he's 300 pounders. So to me, it's not obviously a mirror image, but just in some of the intangibles and some of the things that he brings, I thought Dom Picard was a good comparison. And if he has the career that Dom had, that's a hell of a pick at 7.
Yeah, I was on the Argos Fancast a couple days ago, and they were talking about that sort of nastiness, and they said he reminded them of sort of a lineman from another generation, an old school football player. And I thought that was a really great way to say it. When you watch him play, it does remind you of a lineman from years past, kind of like what you're saying. This sort of, he's not a giant. He's not 7 feet tall like seemingly everyone else that plays offensive line nowadays. They're even 6'8" guards, which drives me crazy personally. But it's so funny to look at that through the lens that they provided me with. I'm like, yeah, he's an old school football player. I think that's really cool.
If there's an instance where he gets in, because Cody Speller's obviously the starting center on paper. We'll see how everything plays out of camp. I don't think anybody's guaranteed a starting spot. Maybe Phil Blake. But if you have at some point on the field, if you have Nicastro with Blake and Bladek, holy crap, that's a lot of nasty in the middle of the field. For guys, I haven't met Nicastro yet, nor have I spoken to him, but the other two guys are pretty chill guys. But when they get on the field, they turn it on, and that's part of their on-field personality. If you had the three of those in the middle of the field, holy crap. I would not want to be an interior guy on the other side.
So in spite of Coach McAdoo's perhaps understated yes with the Doc Stater selection, there has to have been something of a celebratory mood at picking up Doc Stater in the second round. Is there a moment that you can recall in any other draft where there was as much a high at being able to get their guy in whichever round?
That's a good question. I'm trying to go back and think. Like when it was the Richards draft, you know what? There are some. Everybody was really happy when O'Connor was there because they thought he was going to go. Last year, Dylan Giffen, nobody thought Dylan Giffen was going to be there where he was. And that year, when they were talking about who they may pick in whatever slot that was, it was like, okay, if Giffen isn't here, let's take a look at this guy, blah, blah, blah. And every time they talked, it didn't matter whether it was an offensive or a defensive coach talking, it was, if Giffen isn't here. And when he was there, it was like, okay. So there was that kind of relief, exuberance. Everybody was happy. Achimpong as a protected pick. There was kind of a worry that he was going to go. Kassar, when they were able to finesse him the same way that they did with Dockstader, in almost, at the back end of the draft, what was going to happen. So there have been a few, but it was just, okay, we got him. And there was this sense of, I can't believe we got both. So, and that's no disrespect to the other guys, because there were other players being mentioned should either one of those two players having been gone, and it might not necessarily have been an offensive tackle, but when the two guys that you wanted were both there, pretty much a no-brainer.
It's amazing. And one of the things I found, I don't know if it's the most interesting thing. There's so many great things from this article. And folks watching or listening at home, if you haven't checked out Mike Hogan's latest article, you should read all his stuff. Always go to argonauts.ca, read all of his articles. They're amazing. The insight is awesome. The access you have is unbeatable. But the piece on this year's draft, I thought was truly excellent. So if you haven't read it, you have to. But one thing you said in there that I thought was really cool was that it was Coach Dinwiddie who sort of stepped up and took the floor, which to me, I found odd. I thought in a good way. But there's always a hierarchy in football and in any business, and the Toronto Argonauts are both a football team and a business. And a coach like Bill Belichick, I would expect to step up and take the floor. But Coach Dinwiddie is a very new head coach. And to see him take charge like that must have been kind of interesting. I think that says something about both Coach Dinwiddie and also the level of comfort that Pinball Clemens has in himself and the staff around him. How did you see that?
I asked Mike about that afterwards, and I said, because and this might surprise you as well, when Barker and Milanovic were together, Barker, as hands-on as he is in a draft, gave the floor to Milanovic. So Milanovic would kind of be the traffic cop in that pairing, but, Barker obviously had all kinds of input. And essentially the final say. But in terms of running the show, it was Milanovic. And what Pinball said was the coaches are all used to working with Ryan. So maybe they'd be more comfortable giving their opinion to Ryan than they would to me or to Murph or to Vinny. He said, we're all capable of doing it, but Ryan runs every one of their Zoom meetings. So why wouldn't he do that? And, obviously in discussion with Murph and with Pinball and Vince, it was Ryan who, is a film fanatic and would have gone over the minutia of every one of these draft picks. He would be, okay, who do we want to see here? When the third round pick was coming up, they had several names in mind and had, we're kind of talking about who may go where. And they'd be talking about a guy, and then he was gone. It was like, oh, okay, well, who's the next guy? Blah, 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 blah. Okay, this guy, la, 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 la. That guy's gone. And it was 4 or 5 picks in a row where they were talking about a guy, and as they were talking about him, Ryan Jansen's voice would come on and say, the Shreveport Pirates have taken Joe Smith. And it was like, we were just talking about Joe Smith. And they were kind of laughing about it, but it was kind of funny if the stakes weren't so high, it was kind of funny to see everybody that they had been talking about and not necessarily deciding on, but at least bringing that name to the floor, being taken. And they may have taken Hoyt anyways, but who knows?
It's probably easier to laugh about when you've already got Nicastro and Dockstader on the boat. It probably makes laughing about difficulties like that in later rounds more amusing than frustrating. You can imagine it going the other way as well. But it certainly worked out really well for this group. I'm interested in the Tommy Neal pick. I thought was really interesting. I liked him a lot, but I had a really tough time distinguishing a difference between he and a couple other guys like Dylan St. Pierre out of Ottawa. I really like Will Corby, U of T. I really like similar sort of, big physical slot receivers. What do you think it was? They got to interview all these guys. What do you think it was about Tommy Neal that made the difference for them to say, let's spend our pick on this McMaster receiver?
They got to know him really well. They know that there's a real value on special teams right from the get-go. He's a football player. First time I saw him was in his freshman year, and it astonished me. And I'm not going to make the comparison, but just in this one aspect, please allow me to do this. Andy Fantuz was great at high pointing a football in traffic. And I found Neal was able to do that as well, but not just on the short stuff, but on deep balls. He was really good at being able to go up and separate himself from sometimes double coverage. And that really stuck. I'm saying, this guy's a freshman. That's interesting. He ran a 4.6 something at the combine. Those certainly weren't, the gold standard of combine numbers this year. But I think that kind of surprised everybody a little bit. And they really love his character. They love his intelligence. Like, he's a football player who's going to come in essentially and compete on special teams, immediately. And, Levi Noel is 30, 31 years old now. At some point, he's going to step away. And not saying Neal is ever going to be the special teams player that Levi is, but, he's a guy that can eventually offer you more than just being that slot receiver. He can play several spots and, with some speed, and he's a Swiss Army knife on special teams where you can use him in more than one capacity. So I think that's the reasoning. And that's the guy, and again, I wrote about it, that's the guy that they talked about at 25. I have the sheet in front of me that my discussions with Vince Magri, and he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 names as the potential 7 pick. And he had 6 more names as a guy that may go at 12. And Tommy Neal's name is in that list. So that's how much Vince liked him. That's how much Vince liked Tommy Neal. So he got his wish just a lot later in the draft.
That's awesome. So, Mike, as I said, I'm a Bengals fan, and I found it interesting in the lead up to the NFL draft that the Bengals were pretty outspoken, unusually so, about how they had actually consulted with Joe Burrow about LSU players like Jamar Chase, for example, leading up to the draft. When the Argos picked Trevor Hoyt, the linebacker out of Ottawa, I immediately wondered if they might have spent any time picking Jack Cassar's brain. Obviously, they talked to all the U Sports coaches. Do you think they talk to the players that they've got on the roster as well and sort of say, hey, you played with so-and-so. What do you think about this player and this player?
I'm sure they would have. I mean, Hoyt and Cassar, for those who don't know, Cassar was a pick a year ago. He was the middle linebacker. Hoyt was on the weak side, and they were roommates. So they know each other exceptionally well. So it turned out it's an interesting pick. Like, this dude is, pinball always says, if you're the smartest man in the room, it's your own fault. I don't know who would be the smartest man in the room if not Hoyt. He's studying astrophysics at Carleton. That's his major. He's a remarkably smart guy, multi-time, I think a 3-time academic All-Canadian. He's that guy. And he's also, he's really big and runs really well and is going to be a guy on special teams. Ivan really fought hard for him, kind of against the guys that wanted Greg Neal to that 25 spot. So it wasn't a heated discussion, but again, it was very passionate about who they take. And, it got on again when they got onto the 30 pick where Vince was saying, okay, now it's Hoyt, Hoyt was 33. I'm sorry. They just got so many picks, Hoyt and Neal. And then, Kevin was saying, I really want the special teams guy. He can play linebacker as well. He's a great fit to learn at that position. And he's going to come in and he's going to play every special team, and he's got the smarts, he's got the character. And then, Vince was saying Neal is the guy because Edmonton needs another receiver. They're picking 2 picks after this. And sure enough, Edmonton went with the Johnson kid from University of Buffalo at 32. So they were able to get both of those guys in that instance as well. So, there was a gamble at 25 going with Villain because there was that other aspect of wanting Neal in that spot. So the conversations were pretty intense, not heated at all, but they ended up getting 3 guys they really wanted at different parts of the draft.
You can read all of Mike Hogan's work at argonauts.ca. You can follow him at Mike Hogan Argos on Twitter. Hoagie, you've been so generous with your time today. We've gone way longer than we planned, and I thank you so much for that. I really appreciate the time you spent with us. It's been awesome talking to you today.
Anytime. I always look forward to this podcast. There's a lot of great information, and the more information we can give Argo fans and let them get to know the players and the X's and Argos of the game, I think that's tremendous. So keep doing what you two are doing, and it's a privilege to be on the show.
Thank you so much. It's very kind. Mike Hogan, Communications Manager and play-by-play voice for your Toronto Argonauts.